Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this video, we will be talking about Itbaq and Infitah. Bismillah, let's go ahead. In terms of learning outcomes and what you should be able to get out from this video, number one, you should be able to explain what Itbaq is and what Infitah is. And you should be able to analyze the difference between Itbaq and Isti'la and the practical difference between them. Let's start with a couple of letters as examples. So let's take the letter Dha. When you say Dha, Dhalim, and let's compare that to the letter Kaf. Ka, Kanu. Now with the Dha, when we say Dha, what happens with the Dha is the sound is confined within the mouth. It's confined between the tongue and the upper palate. Dha, Dha versus Ka, Ka, where there's no confinement of the sound. So Itbaq is a characteristic of letters which is to do with the confinement of sound. So letters that have a confinement of sound between the tongue and the upper palate, they have the characteristic of Itbaq. And there's four letters that have Itbaq. That's the Sad, the Dad, the Ta, and the Dha. So Sad, Dad, Ta, and Dha. So the Sad, we say Sadiq, Sadiq. Sound is confined. The Dad, we say Daqat, Daqat. The Ta, Ta'ah, Ta'ah. And the Dha, Dhalim, Dhalim. So Itbaq, once again, is the confinement of the sound between the tongue and the upper palate. And the opposite to Itbaq is Infitah, where there's no confinement between the tongue and the upper palate. And all the other letters, except the Sad, Dad, Ta, Dha, are letters of Infitah, with no confinement. Let's look at some images to explain this a bit further. So here with the Dha, for example, you see how the sound is confined, Dha, Dha. The sound is confined between the tongue and the upper palate. And if we were to compare it to the Kaf, Ka, Ka, see, the sound isn't confined between the tongue and the upper palate. So Dha, the Dha, confined, has Itbaq, Itbaq, confinement. The Kaf, Ka, doesn't have this confinement of the sound between the tongue and the upper palate. And that is a letter of Infitah. Now let's move on to the second point. And that's about analyzing the difference between Itbaq and Isti'la. And some people get these confused. So let's talk about Isti'la, and let's remember the video about Isti'la. We said Isti'la is about the direction of sound. So the direction of sound is upwards. Now Itbaq is the confinement of sound. Itbaq is the confinement of sound. Let's put that in some images to make a bit more sense. Let's look at the Qaf. When we say Qa, Qalu, you see the direction of sound with the letter Qaf is upwards, Qa. However, the sound isn't quite confined within the mouth. The sound isn't confined between the tongue and the upper palate. Qa. The direction is upwards, so it's Isti'la, but there's no confinement. There's no Itbaq. Now, if you look at the Dha, Dha, you see here the sound and the direction of sound is upwards, and the sound is confined between the tongue and the upper palate. Dha. So let's revisit the letters of Isti'la. The letters of Isti'la, we said, are combined in the statement Khussa Dartin Qil. So these 7 letters, the direction of sound for these 7 letters is upwards. The direction of sound is upwards, and therefore they have Isti'la. However, 4 of these 7 letters, the Sad, the Dad, the Dha, and the Ta, 4 of these letters have an additional characteristic where the sound is confined within the mouth. The sound is confined between the tongue and the upper palate. The Sad, the Dad, the Ta, and the Dha. So these have confinement as well as the direction going upwards. And the other letters, the Qaf, the Kha, and the Ghain, the direction is upwards, but there's no confinement. So from the 7 letters of Isti'la, 4 of them also have Itbaq, confinement. Now, what's the practical outcome about why we talk about إطباق and استعلاء and which letters have استعلاء as well as إطباق? What does that actually mean? What's the outcome of all that? Well, the letters of استعلاء, the 7 letters of استعلاء, they are thick letters. They have تفخيم. And the note here is a letter that has استعلاء and on top of that has إطباق, so the 4 letters, they have an additional تفخيم. So they sound even thicker or heavier than the letters that only have استعلاء but no إطباق. So the letters that have إطباق and استعلاء are thicker or have more تفخيم than the letters that just have استعلاء but no إطباق. Let's take some examples and compare some words with the similar حركة. So if we look at the ظا, ظالم, ظا, there's confinement of the sound. ظا, that's a thick ظا versus غالب, غالب. Now the ghain, it is thick, it is مفخمة. However, the ظا has more تفخيم than the ghain. Just in the way it's correctly pronounced, it has more tafkhim. Doesn't mean we over-exaggerate it. That's just the characteristic of this letter that gives it this extra tafkhim because the sound is confined within the mouth, confined between the tongue and the upper palate. And another word, عظيم, عظيم. So the dha here is thicker than قيل, قيل, than the qaf in قيل. So again, we're comparing letters with the same حركة. ظالم and غالب, the dha is thicker than the ghain. So the letters of إطباق have this extra characteristic of strength that makes them even thicker or more tafkhim or heavier than the letters of استعلاء that don't have إطباق. Now let's revisit those learning objectives. The first was to explain. Now, can you explain what إطباق is? We said إطباق is the confinement of sound between the tongue and the upper palate. And the opposite to إطباق is انفتاح, where there's no confinement. And what are the letters of إطباق? صاد, ضاد, طاء, and ظا. And the second point we talked about was the difference. We wanted to analyze the difference between استعلاء and إطباق. We said استعلاء is about the sound or the direction of sound going upwards. إطباق is about confinement of the sound. And the letters of استعلاء were خص, ضغط, قض, and 4 of them have إطباق: صاد, the ضاد, the طاء, and the ظا. We'll see you in the next video. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.